Welcome everybody. So this is a practice test for BAIS 220. So I'm going to begin by clicking on an Excel and opening a blank workbook here. Let me go ahead and save it. Just going to save it locally as BAIS practice test. And I'll go ahead and replace it. So I'm going to be following along this Word document that has instructions on it. So I'm going to be naming sheet 1 as taxes and inserting headings for name and salary in the first two columns. So now I'm going to go to the internet and I'm going to try to generate 50 random names that I'm going to paste into cell A2 here. So that prevents me the trouble of I can have a longer worksheet without having to make up a bunch of names and think about it. So I've Googled generate 50 random names, and I'm familiar with this randomlist.com. So I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to change my quantity to 50 and generate the names. I'm just going to select, starting with the first one down to the last one, and I'm going to right click and copy. And I'll go back to Excel into cell A2 and I'm going to paste. I'm going to select this paste option right here, the second one, just to generate the first and last names in kind of a plain text setting. So the next thing I'm going to do in following along in the worksheet is I'm going to insert a blank column because I want to separate the first and the last name. So I'm going to select this column B and right click and insert. And then I'm going to go back to column A and go into the data menu item, and I'm going to select text to columns. And from this wizard that pops up, I'm going to choose the default, the delimited, so the first and last name are separated by a space. So I'm going to click next, and then I'll check the space button, and notice the preview shows that it will split the first and last name as expected. So I'll go ahead and finish this and change my heading to first name and last name. And the next step, I want to generate some random salaries. So I'm going to use the rand between function. So I'm going to type equals rand between, and I'm going to specify 0 to 100,000. Hopefully that's 100,000. Count my zeros. And then I'm going to hit enter, and I'm going to hit this autofill button to autocomplete. Now with the rand between, throughout the worksheet, as long as you keep entering new formulas and functions, these the random numbers are going to keep calculating again. So in order to avoid that, I'm just going to right click here and copy these values, and then I'm going to select the paint special option and choose this option right here to retain the values. Notice how it changed one more time, but now I have values in these cells instead of formulas. At this point I'm going to do a little bit of formatting, so I'm just going to select the column headings and bold and underscore, and I'm going to center them, and I'll center the last names, and then in the salary column I'm also going to center, but I'm also going to select currency as my format. And I'll remove the last two decimals since they are all zeros. Okay, so I'm on to the next we're all the way up to number 6 here. So we want to insert an if statement, and this will be a nested if, where we want to categorize the salary as either low, middle, or high, with the cutoff values being 25,000 and 75,000. Notice that it's less than and greater than for the low and the high. Okay, so I'm going to start an if function here, and I'll select the salary. So there's a couple different ways to set this up, but I'm going to just begin with the less than. So if it's less than 25,000, I'm going to put the word low. If that's false, I need another if. So I'm going to type if again with another parentheses. Notice that this one's red and the first one was black. And I'm going to see if C2 this time is less than or equal to 75,000. If that is true, I'm going to put the word middle. And if that's false, meaning it's greater than 25,000 and also greater than 75,000, then I'm going to put the word high. And then I'm going to close both of my parentheses, the red for the second if statement and the black for the first if statement. And I'm going to hit enter, and hopefully I'm going to get the word middle, because the salary in row 2 is in the middle category. And I'm going to double click to autocomplete, and I'm just going to kind of manually check to make sure these values match the criteria that I have. So 18,000 is low, 48,000 is middle, over 75,000 is high, 87 is high. So I'm confident that I've computed this nested if correctly. I'm going to select the last name and then column and click the format painter, and then select column D so that it's centered and that the heading is bolded. Okay, so for the next step, I'm going to try to set up a little data table we're going to make up a scenario where we have tax rates of 30%, 20%, and 10% for high, middle, and low. But they have to be alphabetized, so I'm going to organize the table high, low, and middle. So let me set up a new worksheet that I'm going to call tax rates. And I'm going to put those values in high, low, and middle. And I'll put in 30%, 10%, and 20%. And I'm going to go ahead and save this range as a named range by going to Formulas and Define Name, and I'm going to call it tax rate. So later on we can, in a VLOOKUP or in a function or formula, we could reference this range just by using the word tax rate rather than having to go to this worksheet and select the range. Notice that it is also absolute referenced so that in this range, so that the data can be copied or auto-filled without having to apply any absolute references. So I'm going to click OK here and go back to my main worksheet, and the next instruction is going to be to do a VLOOKUP. So I'm going to insert the tax rate heading, and I'm going to pull up my function window and search for VLOOKUP. And I'm going to fill in these four categories. So hopefully you've seen this a number of times, but my lookup value is going to be the salary category. My table array is going to be tax rate, and notice that it filled in here so I know that I typed the right value for the table array. And my tax rate is in the second column of this array, column 2, and I want to look up an exact match. So I'm going to type false in there. And I'll double click to autofill this function down to the bottom of our range. And I think I'll format this as percent and center it. Okay, so we're on to the next part. And we're going to do something similar to what we did for salary for number of dependents, where we're going to choose a random number between 0 and 6 and then copy and paste to freeze the values. So I'm going to put dependents as my heading. And I'm going to put equals rand between 0 to 6. Double click to autofill. I'll center it, and then I'm going to copy the range. I still have the exact same range selected, so I can paste special values. And when I have this green kind of dotted outline and I want to get out of edit mode, I can hit the escape key on my keyboard to get kind of back to editing. And if I move my mouse into the cells and scroll down, I can see there's values in the formula bar up here, and there are no equals rand between. So that just allows us not to have to have the system recalculate as we're doing, as we're completing this worksheet. So I'm kind of formatting consistently as I go along. Okay, so we're on to the next question here. So we want to insert a column called eligible for assistance. So we're setting up the scenario where if they have more than one dependent and they have low income, then they're going to be qualified as eligible. Otherwise, we want to leave it blank. So when you have two conditions that have to be met in an if statement, we use our if and function. So the syntax for this is a little bit confusing, so it's always good to have an example handy. So this is one more option you have for this. So I'm going to put in my heading, eligible for assistance. So in this first cell here, I'm going to use an if and function. So in the if and function, notice that you started off as a regular if, and then you have an open parentheses with an and then another parentheses. And then inside of there, I'm going to put my two conditions that have to be met. So the income in cell D2 has to equal the value low. And the second condition is the number of dependents in cell F2 has to be greater than 0. So if both of those conditions are met, then it would be considered true, and I have the I want to put the word eligible in. Now I don't want anything to appear, I just want the cell to remain blank if the condition is false. So but I can't just close the parenthesis here, or it will put the word false up and down the cells, and that looks a little funny. So I'm going to put in open and close parentheses to represent blank. And now I can close my parentheses and hope that I've done this correctly. So I'm going to hit enter, and I have a blank here, but they're middle income, even though their dependence is greater than 0. So I want to look like down here or this one is low and they have more than one dependent, I should expect the word eligible to appear there. So just manually checking all of these. So anything that is middle or high isn't eligible. If it's low, the number of dependents has to be greater than 0. So it looks to me, here's a low with a 0, and eligible doesn't appear. So it seems as though this if and is working as I expected it to. So we're on to the next task, number 11. So I'm inserting a column for deduction and a cell for deduction per dependent. And just resizing our columns. Okay, in this question, we're going to set a cell value equal to $100 that they're going to be able to claim for each one of these dependents. So we're going to multiply this value times this value, but since this value is subject to change, we want to reference this value rather than hard code the 100. So in this column, we want to multiply the number of dependents times the cell that has the deduction in it. So I'm going to put in that function, but if I just were to autofill it now, I'd get zeros up and down the list. And the reason is because when you autofill, your formulas change and your cell references change to reflect. So in column 2, row 2, this part of the formula becomes J2, which is empty, so that's why we get a 0. So in order to fix this, I want to apply an absolute reference to J1 in the original formula. So I'm going to put dollar signs in front of the J and the 1, or hit the F4 in my keyboard with my mouse in that part of the formula. So now I have $J $1, and I hit enter and I get the 600 again, but now when I autofill, I get the correct values. And I will format that as currency, decrease the decimal, and center. Okay, so we're on to the next step. We're going to change the value to 125 just to make sure our absolute referencing is working. And now we're going to compute the taxes due, which is going to be the salary times the tax rate minus the deductions. So they have their salary here, their tax rate, and their deductions. So we have taxes due as our heading here. And this is going to be kind of more of a conventional formula. So equals salary times their tax rate minus their deductions. And we really don't need any parentheses here. You want to do the multiplication before the subtraction, but order of operations would allow that to happen anyway. So I'll double click to finish that. If I wanted to, I could put parentheses around the multiplication, but it's not necessary. If you had to do the subtraction first, you would want to put parentheses around that so it didn't apply the incorrect formula, but it's not necessary for this particular one. Okay, so I'm on to the next step. So we're going to insert some conditional formats, icon sets for in the taxes due. So I'm going to select my data in this column and then go to conditional formatting, and I'm going to pick an icon set just to apply a red, yellow, or green circle for high, low, and medium values. And then with this selected, I'm also going to apply another conditional format to highlight cells less than 0, and I'll just leave the default as the red text with red fill, and I click OK, and you can see I have one value here that is negative. So now we're going to have a couple of summary cells where we're going to compute the average and the number of negative taxes. Just double check what I'm averaging here. So average taxes due and number of negative taxes. Okay, so I'm going to type equals average, and I'm just going to click the entire column heading there, and I can show what my average taxes due are. Now, to count how many negative numbers we have in this range, I'm going to search for a function called COUNTIF, and I'm going to look in my range. I'm going to search all through column K, so I'm going to type K through K as my range, and my criteria is going to be less than 0. And you can see I have 1, so that matches up with the data that I've highlighted there. Depending on your random numbers, you may not have had any. So let's go in and manually change a couple of salaries to 0, and if they have any dependents, that should result in negative taxes. So I'll just randomly pick a couple here, 0 here and 0 here. Both of those now have negative taxes, and you can see that they're highlighted and that we have a 3 now as our count. Okay, now step number 19 is to sort the entire worksheet by last name. So I'm going to select my entire worksheet here by clicking between the A and the 1 up here. And then from the Home button, I'm going to go to Sort and Filter. And I'm going to select this Custom Sort. And down where it says Sort By, notice that I have my data has headers. It, by default, is checked. So I'm going to select last name as my sort by column, and then I'm going to click OK, and notice that everything is sorted now by last name. Little bug here, the average taxes and number of taxes shouldn't have been included in the range there, but I can always cut those, paste them back up. I should have been saving all along, So after each step I should have saved, but better late than never. Okay, in a new worksheet, I'm going to add the headings last name and taxes due, and then I'm going to do a data validation drop box. So I'm going to name this worksheet Lookup Taxes, and I'm going to type last name and taxes due. And we're going to create a little lookup window here where they can search for a particular entry. So in the last name cell here, we're going to go to data and then data validation. And rather than allowing any value, we're going to make a list. And here in different examples, we've typed the different allowable values. So here we could have, like in your assignment, you typed like 0%, 5%, and so on. You can also select a range here. So I'm going to click this button to the right here, and I'm going to go off to the main worksheet, and I'm going to select column B, and then I'm going to go back and hit OK. And now you can see in the taxes column, I can scroll down and pick any of the last names. So now in the taxes due, this is where we want to apply a VLOOKUP. So this one is a little more tricky just because we have so many columns. So I'm going to go open my function window and select VLOOKUP. My lookup value is going to be the last name in cell A2. Now my table array, I'm going to go over to the taxes column, and beginning with last name, I'm going to select all the way over to taxes due because I want that to be part of the range. My column index, so the taxes due is in column K, so starting in B, I'm going to count over. B is column 1, C is column 2, D is column 3, E is column 4, F is column 5, G is column 6, H is column 7, I is column 8, J is column 9, and K is column 10. So the column index is going to be a 10, and we want to look up an exact match. And so we want false in that, so I'm going to click OK. Format that cell as currency, and just double check that ball here had taxes due of $24,000. So that looks correct. And I'll just click a couple others just to make sure. Chen, 6,000. So that is working correctly. Let me save. And that completes our practice skills test. So thank you for watching, and good luck on the test.